Hello, friends. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Where You're Planted podcast. My name is Deborah, and I'm your host, and I'm super thrilled and excited to be recording another episode of the podcast and just sort of getting back into the swing of things. So, if you are not watching on video, you should be. But if you're watching on video, you will be able to see that I am in a new and different location because I moved pretty recently and I'm like all settled into my new space, and it really feels good to be recording like this. This is sort of the vision that I've always wanted, that I've always had in terms of how I want my recording setup to be and what I want it to look like. So to be able to have that vision, come to fruition, and to be able to manifest that vision feels really good. And then in terms of like some logistical things, speaking of like video, so I used to just do the video uploads with Spotify, but I think I'm gonna stop that. I find that I don't know, I don't really feel like it's making much of a difference in terms of increasing the reach of these episodes. And so I think what I'm just gonna do is I'm still going to be making videos because I really actually do enjoy making these episode videos. But what I'm also going to do is I am going to just stick to audio episodes for Spotify and then upload videos to YouTube. So just make sure you're following me on YouTube. I will have all of the details and whatever in the show notes. But in today's episode, I really wanted to talk about what moving to a new home has taught me about myself and about things and stuff and consumption, and how this move was everything that I did not know that I needed, and how it has like just sort of rocked me in a way that I did not expect. So like, I'm just gonna sort of like get right into it. So thanks for being here. Hope you stick around, and I hope you find something truly useful from this episode and from this conversation. But, everyone moves, we all do it, but I don't think really anyone talks enough about the lessons that you can learn from the process of moving. And like I said, for me, it has really brought to the surface lessons related to possessions, attachment to stuff, intentionality about, what I bring into my space, and I think my lifestyle as a whole. One of the biggest lessons that I think I took away from this is that I have too much crap, okay? And I think having too much crap is something of a relative statement. For me, the amount of stuff that I have is too much for me, but for somebody else, it's the bare minimum. For another person, it's like hoarder level. But, and I think moving forces you to really take stock and to see everything you own. If you approach it intentionally, you're forced to go off of autopilot and think carefully about the stuff that you have. And for me, it made me realize how I lived in my condo for just a little bit over 2 years, which in the grand scheme of things is not a very long time in one place. But even during those short 2 years, I still somehow managed to accumulate stuff. And it was a kind of accumulation I did not even notice. And it's like so easy to do. Yeah, for me, like going about my day to day, it was just like one more thing here that I bring into my home or the other. And because I sort of had a spot for those things, they were out of the way and almost out of sight, out of mind. I didn't think about how much stuff I ultimately had. So for me, it just made me realize that it's so easy to, in the course of living your life, accumulate stuff without thought or intentionality. Another thing that came up for me during this move and during this reflection is the emotional weight that you put, that we attach to things. There were some things that I just had or I was holding on to, because, oh, I don't want to get rid of this. I spent money on it. I don't want to get rid of this, or I have this because it was a gift. And, I feel bad about getting rid of it, even though it has no utility for me. Or I'm holding on to things for sentimental reasons. I found my house keys from my home back in Nigeria. And it's one of those things that I don't think I will ever get rid of. There are some things that I don't think I'll ever get rid of because they have such sentimental value to me. So like those keys, like a wallet that my grandmother gave me, this sash that I got after I graduated high school, my cord of distinction from graduating from my undergrad, and just little things like that. And it just made me realize that we as human beings, we have this tendency to put a lot of emotional weight and attachment to things, and sometimes it's not bad. I think it's fine to be sentimental about certain things, but at some point you do have to be brutal about what is worth keeping and what is just taking up space, not just physical space but also emotional and mental space, and whether or not those things are deserving of the space that they take up. And so another realization or another feeling that sort of came up with this, during this process, was a lot of guilt and shame about the amount of stuff that I have, but also about the money that I spent on things that I didn't really end up getting that much utility out of. It's items that I purchased like impulsively, that I ended up maybe using once or twice, or that ultimately does not even fit the life that I'm trying to build. And so there's like shame around that stuff, shame around the amount of consumption that even though I to an extent preach against overconsumption, realizing that I have been an unwitting and maybe a subconsciously willing participant in consumption culture, and a little bit of shame too, because I've moved in with someone who, in the grand scheme of things, is way more minimalist than I am, has way less stuff than I do, and so just the image of me just continuously bringing stuff in and in and in, where it's like, oh my god, babe, you have a lot of stuff. And it wasn't said with like any malice or anything, it was just the reality. But I think for me, there's a certain level of shame. It's like, oh my god, I do have a lot of stuff, and also having to like navigate where to put things. Yes, I've moved to like a bigger space, but it's two people living in this space, and we don't have like an infinite amount of storage, right? So yeah, and I think it also really made me want to be careful about my tendencies, because I think it sort of runs in the family. I have a family member who just has a lot of stuff, and I don't want to get to that point. And so it's like also like shame around, like, Deb, you should know better than to just have stuff and stuff and stuff, right? And then finally, there was also like the big realization, and the biggest question of all is, do I really need or want all of this stuff? And for the most part, the answer was no. No, I don't. And so moving in that aspect was good and much needed, because it allowed me to question why I had certain things and whether or not I wanted to bring them with me to this new space and to this new life that I'm trying to create for myself. Moving on to, like, I also want to touch on what all of the stuff actually represents. And I sort of came to like 3 big points. The first is they represent consumption patterns, like I alluded to, that I didn't really notice. and the fact that I have, unwittingly or maybe wittingly participated in a culture that glorifies consumption and just glorifies having stuff for the sake of having stuff, and how easily influenced I also am in terms of having stuff because I see another creator or influencer having that same thing, even though our lifestyles are different, our tastes might be different, but it's just because someone else has it. And so I sort of want it at the same time. And so it also, yeah, made me realize that I may not be as impulsive as, some other people out there, but I am definitely impulsive when it comes to certain things. There are like things here and there that I bought that I didn't really need to buy, because I was doing perfectly fine without them, but they were there and they looked cute or aesthetic or whatever, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get it. Another thing that sort of relates to this is the gap between who I am and who I want to be. Sometimes we bring stuff into a home. And for me, this was the case. I had like pieces of decor and stuff that were for an idealized version of what I wanted my home to represent. Rather than, so it's like a future, a vision of what I wanted my home to look like. And so I was collecting things as a means of working toward that vision and who I wanted to be or whatever in my home. But I never got to that point. So it was just, I never, acted on that image or that vision or that dream, but I had all of this stuff that were supposed to facilitate me getting to that point, and it just never happened. So it just ended up being just stuff that I had. Anyway, the final point that I wanted to touch on what all this stuff actually represents is, the illusion of what if. What if I keeping stuff or holding on to things because you might need it in the future, or because it might align to some version of yourself in the future. Again, this idea of thinking and making plans for the future and living your life in accordance to a future that's not yet here, rather than living your life based on what the present moment dictates, if that makes sense. So all of this reflection is just ultimately just going to be reflections if we don't make an intentional shift toward something different. And so for me, before the move, I wasn't really thinking about, the stuff that I owned. They were just there, and I was just collecting and accumulating more crap and accumulating more crap. It was sort of just like automatic. I saw something that I wanted. If I could afford it, I'd buy it. Not really being intentional about what I was bringing into my space and into my life. But with the move really forced me to go through something of an editing process. And again, looking through what I owned and figuring out, why do I have this? Do I really want it? Is this serving any purpose in my life? Or am I just holding on to it with the intention of it being useful at an undefined point in the future, rather than seeing it for what it is right now as just stuff that I have right now that's not serving a purpose. And so with that editing process, you get to be able to curate your belongings instead of just accumulating. And I have sort of decided that the only things that I really want to collect, I want to have a lot of, is probably books. My dream is to have a library when we have a bigger home at some point. I want to be able to collect books and cute mugs, and maybe like little souvenirs from travels in terms of like fridge magnets. I want like a whole wall of fridge magnets. But for the other things, I have decided that I'm really going to be judicious and careful about what it is that I bring in, and to bring stuff into my home that actually reflect my tastes, and that I'm not just collecting things just to collect things. I'm picking things out with an eye for quality over just the quantity of it. And again, I am curating my home and my space in a way that not only reflects my eclectic tastes, but also respects my partner's tastes and the need to not have a lot of crap too, because he's more minimalist. So just being a lot more, intentional about what I have. And so again, this brings me to my next point, which is in terms of determining what stays and what goes. The things worth keeping to me would be stuff that we use regularly, in your day-to-day life, in your kitchen, in your office, in your closet, whatever that may be. Stuff that you love, you actually truly love. Stuff that serve a sentimental purpose. For me, things that remind me of my childhood home or growing up, I'm very much willing to keep those things. Things that serve a purpose in my life, they're like functional, they have function. Things that bring me joy, and for me that would be my books. I love seeing my books nice and like organized on my bookshelves, in our bookcase in the living room. It just looks good. It brings me so much joy, even though they're not like really serving a purpose. Maybe like they're serving an aesthetic purpose, but they make me happy to have them. And also, things that align with how I want to live, how I want to feel in my home, in my body. So for me, that sort of looks like a pantry that includes ingredients and food stuff that make me feel good and healthy. That could be an office space that is tidy and organized, where everything is put in like places that they need to be. When I moved here, I downsized from 2 desks to just 1 desk. And instead of having just like stuff spread out everywhere, everything's consolidated in one space, and I have everything organized and arranged in a way that reflects how I want to live my life. How I want to live my life in an organized and cohesive manner. And then another thing that I was really thinking about in terms of how I want to like continue moving forward in terms of the stuff that I bring into my space is thinking about ourselves, my future self, when we're not going to spend the rest of our lives here. This is our start, our home. Eventually we're going to move to a hopefully bigger space when we start a family or whatever. But I want to put future Deb into consideration here, which is just making sure that when the time comes for another move, I'm not kicking myself in the shin. I'm not cursing, current Deb or all the iterations of me before that future self, and wondering why I collected so much stuff. I want to get to a point where moving is easy, and it's like, well, yeah, it's gonna be a breeze to do this, because all the stuff that we were not having to make decisions about what are we going to keep or what are we going to get rid of, because we are intentional about what it is that we've brought into our home, and we know that everything we have serves a purpose, has a place, and will have a place in whatever new place it is that we decide to continue our lives. And so this whole process has made me really realize that I function best when I don't have a lot of stuff. I think having a lot of stuff, the amount of overwhelm that I felt during the move-in process in terms of just how much stuff that I had was quite incredible. It was quite eye-opening. I don't want to be the kind of person that just has stuff to have stuff, and it's like stuff that's like scattered everywhere. This doesn't mean that I'm minimalist, but I want to be minimalist-ish, bring things into my life that do serve a purpose and that have their place, and function, and also bring me joy and are pretty. And I think that's the thing, that's the balance that I'm trying to find, is how do I live my life with less stuff, quote unquote, but also making sure that the stuff I have is pretty, reflects the aesthetics that matter to me, and instead of making me feel flustered and overwhelmed, just makes me feel at peace. Yeah, I don't know. This is something that I'm still like sort of figuring out, but I think what I've definitely taken away from this is that I had too much crap, and I'm still working on getting rid of stuff as much as I can, and just sort of sticking to that lifestyle. And I think it also helps to be with a person who doesn't put as much stock in things. And so finding that balance in having things, but not having too many things. So yeah, the move has been eye-opening, has been great, has been stressful. It was a hell of a couple of weeks for me, but I'm glad it happened. I'm glad it happened when it did and in the way that it did, because it just made me realize certain things that needed to shift about myself. So yeah, I'm grateful for that. But that's pretty much everything that I wanted to share on today's podcast episode. Thank you so much for being here and for spending the last 20 something minutes with me. I hope you've enjoyed listening and watching. Like I said, make sure to follow the YouTube channel where all the video episodes will be uploaded. You can also follow me on my Instagram, where I do more reflections like this, but shorter form content essentially. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to share. Thank you all so much. I appreciate you, and I will talk to you next time in another episode. But until then, take care and goodbye.